Pokémon Switch is definitely the most anticipated of all Nintendo exclusive titles expected this year. Even so, there is no doubt that a transition from 240p on the 3DS to 720p and higher on the Nintendo Switch does pose a colossal change for the Pokémon franchise. In fact, it is so radical that Game Freak might want to actually play it safe, at least with their first console mainline installment, by returning back to the previous province that started it all. So today, we will look closer at the possibility of a Kanto reboot inside Pokémon Switch. Kanto. No other province evokes so many memories, emotions, and most importantly, nostalgia. For many of us veterans, it all began here. From selecting our first starter Pokémon, getting to know and quickly hate Blue, or Arsehat as we renamed him, setting out on our first adventure from Pallet Town, encountering, battling, and catching our first Rattata and Pidgey in the tall grass on the route to the Pewter City Gym. Things were simpler back in 1998 and 99, but still as magical, as we were slowly introduced to the beautiful world of Pokémon and the great land of Kanto. 20 years later, Pokémon is the best-selling video game franchise of all time and one of the most recognizable brands, period, thanks to its franchise mascot, Pikachu. And, despite moving into new territories during the recent years, involving Mega Evolution, Z-Moves, and Ultra Beasts, few of us ever forget the fully evolved trio of Gen 1, Blastoise, Venusaur, and Charizard. Perhaps due to the fact that this was the only generation where Game Freak didn't spoil the two legendaries on the box art covers. Moving on, as they say, nostalgia is one hell of a drug. Just ask The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and Super Mario Odyssey last year. Both games celebrated the long-lasting legacy of their franchises and drew heavy inspiration from previous installments. For Breath of the Wild, it was naturally its first non-linear, open, and at the same time, ruthless Hyrule NES roots in Zelda 1, while Super Mario Odyssey returned to Super Mario 64's 3D Mario design. Now, call us crazy, but what if instead of going for the obvious Pokémon stars or move to the 8th generation, Game Freak instead wished to turn back to basics and softly reboot the franchise? It might sound a bit ludicrous, but with Nintendo's recent trend of softly rebooting franchises, it wouldn't be too big of a stretch, right? After all, even the Pokémon company softly rebooted Season 1 of the anime with the Pokémon I Choose You movie, which was a rewriting of Ash Ketchum's first adventure with Pikachu in, you guessed it, Kanto. So, could this movie be a hint of things to come? And is this called a core RPG Pokémon title by Game Freak because it marks a return to the original 151 Pokémon? To be honest, we believe that this could be the case, and we are more than glad to explain it to you. Firstly, it is 20 years since the first generation of Pokémon games were released in America and took the continent by storm, launching a Pokémania that the world had never seen before. This cannot be understated. Back in 1999, Pokémon was everywhere from games, toys, and merchandise to TV, and finally, in the form of the hottest trading card game in town. Pikachu and Pokémon took over the world in record time, and there was no turning back. And, interestingly enough, this was exactly the same case when Pokémon Go launched more than a year and a half ago with our Gen 1 favourites.
So much so that even the Norwegian Prime Minister from my political party ditched Candy Crush and remains a dedicated Pokémon Go player to this very day. Back to you, Leo.
Thank you, Conrad. Needless to say, the power of Pikachu, Charizard, Blastoise, Mewtwo, or a number of the other Gen 1 classics cannot be underestimated. And Nintendo, Game Freak, and the Pokémon Company knows this better than anyone. After all, they are the ones who see the financial results from Pokémon Go and what merchandise sells the best. Generation 1 is a moneymaker like no other, and another game set in Kanto will by no doubt sell gangbusters in all age groups. From children who will for the first time be introduced to the franchise, to the loyal Pokémon fan, the Pokémon Go players that were lost after they abandoned the game before the Gen 2 and 3 updates, all the way to the grown-up adults who will more than gladly revisit their childhood with a brand new adventure. As we have already stated, the power of nostalgia and familiarity cannot be underestimated. Just look at Star Wars and you will see why. After all, it has been 14 years since Fire Red and Leaf Green, and 9 years since Heart Gold and Soul Silver, some of the most beloved installments in the entire franchise. Based on all of this, it seems long overdue for a mainline return to Kanto, and perhaps even Johto. but there are also other reasons for a soft reboot. Since secondly, a reboot and return to Kanto in a reimagined Gen 1 would make it possible for Game Freak to complete this core RPG Pokemon title on the Switch in time for holiday 2018. Here's why.
A Kanto soft reboot would not require as much planning as two full-blown Generation 8 titles, because the premise is already set. You have the landscape, locations, and even villain now that Team Rocket is back from the grave, both in the games and the Origins miniseries that can easily be included. The only thing needed is to extend some areas, mix and rearrange some of the gyms, and introduce new characters, but naturally have some Easter eggs to Red, Blue, and Leaf. Would it be a cop-out, safe, soft reboot? Naturally, but one that will make it possible to push this title out in time for the holiday sales and secure this year's sales goals for the Nintendo Switch, and hopefully let them work on an interesting story with a good premise and make the exploration a little more open than in, say, Ultra Sun and Moon. So in many ways, a somewhat non-linear Origins with different characters and, as previously mentioned, premise. We don't want another Force Awakens situation, do we? Just like Breath of the Wild, it will get raving reviews. Some people that will be blinded by stunning HD anime visuals and solid gameplay will give it a perfect 10, and unisonly agree that it will set a new benchmark for the series and future sequels that eventually will build on what is introduced in the first mainline HD console Pokemon title. This scenario seems a little too real when we think about it. Even so, it requires further investigation, so let us get down to the surface of Kanto. Not that Kanto, Pokemon Kanto. First and foremost, as we all know, a soft reboot will most likely go for the 150 original Pokemon formula. It's hard to tell if they will be the exact same Pokemon, even though I guess a certain percentage will be brand new inclusions so you could get a distinctive balance between new and old. Still, a total of 150 softly rebooted Pokemon to catch would leave much less work than any other option for Game Freak, and once again, be more convincing that the new game is coming this year. From a gameplay perspective, the limited amount of Pokemon compared to Gen 6 and 7 would mean that they could bring back the option to let one of your Pokemon follow you in this somewhat open landscape. Do not expect any Breath of the Wild level of freedom though, as this game is still about catching, training, and battling with Pokemon. As such, we believe that you might not be able to climb rocks, mountains, and buildings of Kanto, but perhaps be able to access the legendary bicycle from the get-go. This would make a ton of sense if they decide to ditch the linear progression and rather let you face whatever gym you please. The only twist is that the game learns from Breath of the Wild's mistakes and lets you face whatever area as you please, but each of these adjusts to your skill level so that no areas are walks in the park compared to others. This, and that you cannot face the Elite Four and the League Champion 30 minutes after turning on the game. With that being said, we will not be against a Pokemon entry that is difficult, just like they used to be back in the late 90s and the first decade of the 2000s. That will say, back when the gym leaders in the Elite Four were a true challenge that required skill, strategy, wit, patience, and sometimes multiple attempts to beat. As for the combat system itself, we believe it will remain turn-based with a soft reboot, but perhaps be tweaked to some extent. In spite of some stereotypes when it comes to the Pokemon franchise, with the Switch, it seems that Nintendo are not afraid to make games for both veteran adults and rookie children. So why not add a more sophisticated difficulty option? Say a journalist and kid-friendly Gen 1 Ash Ketchum Ultra Sun and Moon mode, then a medium mode, a red mode, and finally, a Champion Cynthia mode for those with Ultra Balls and Ultra Beasts. No, wait, that was not appropriate. To sum it all up, a Kanto soft reboot with some established elements like Mega Evolution, Z-moves and UB, and some new introductions, with obviously a new cast and more freedom when it comes to exploration, is definitely possible and might be the reason why we are hearing close to nothing about this alleged core RPG Pokemon title. That, or we are just a bunch of daydreaming old nostalgists who believe that Pokemon was better on the good old Game Boy. Even though we all agreed that Gold and Silver were better than Red and Blue. As such, make sure to like it if you are new, subscribe to the Commonwealth Realm, and help us reach 125,000 subscribers in the near future. As a thanks for still being here, here are the options for the next episode of Inside Pokemon Switch. A reboot revolving around Johto and Kanto, or Generation 8. Vote by commenting below. We also want to thank all our gracious patrons, and in particular, Patreon Royal Producer Kenyatta Ali, who make Inside Pokemon Switch and our other shows possible. Plus help us get a little closer to the dream of doing YouTube full-time. If you want to help us reach this goal, improve and increase our productions, then head to patreon.com/commonrealm or click this end card. Until the next episode, keep on training, and we will see you girls and guys soon.